When I turned 23, I moved into the basement apartment beneath my parents' house. The rent was cheap and I could save money while still having some independence. The setup was perfect for me. There was a separate entrance on the side of the house, and the basement had been converted into a proper living space with a small kitchen, bedroom, bathroom, and a decent-sized living area. My parents traveled frequently for work, which meant I often had the entire house to myself. During these times, I would leave the connecting door between the basement and main floor unlocked. It made things convenient when I needed to grab something from upstairs or use their larger kitchen. This particular weekend, my parents had gone to visit my aunt in the next state. They would not be back until Tuesday. I decided to invite my buddies Marcus and Ryan over to watch the basketball playoffs. We had planned a low-key evening with pizza and a few beers. The guys arrived around 6 in the evening, and we settled into the living room. The game was intense, and we were getting pretty loud with our cheering and commentary. Since my parents were away, I had turned up the volume on the television, and we were not worried about noise levels. Marcus and Ryan had each driven their own cars, but as the evening progressed and the drinks kept flowing, they both decided it would be safer to spend the night. The sectional sofa in my living room was large enough to accommodate both of them comfortably. Around midnight, after the game ended and we had exhausted our conversation about the terrible referee calls, I said goodnight and headed to my bedroom. I always locked my bedroom door before going to sleep. It was just a habit I had developed over the years, even when I lived alone. I fell asleep quickly, but sometime in the early morning hours, I woke up suddenly. My room was dark, and I lay still for a moment, trying to figure out what had disturbed my sleep. Then I heard it. Footsteps coming from somewhere above me. The sound was faint but distinct. Someone was walking around upstairs in the main part of the house. My first thought was that one of my friends had gone upstairs to use the bathroom or get some water from the kitchen. The water pressure was better upstairs, and the refrigerator had an ice maker. I closed my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, I heard my bedroom doorknob turn slowly. The door did not open because it was locked. I assumed it was Marcus or Ryan, maybe confused in the dark or looking for the bathroom. I decided not to respond. I was tired and figured if I stayed quiet, whoever it was would realize I was sleeping and leave me alone. The doorknob stopped moving and everything went silent again. Within a few minutes, I had drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I woke up around 9 and found Ryan still asleep on the couch. Marcus had already left, probably heading home to change clothes before work. When Ryan finally stirred, I asked him if he had tried to come into my room during the night. He looked confused and shook his head. "No, man, I was pretty drunk, but I'm pretty sure I never left this couch." "Why?" I explained what had happened, and he just shrugged. "Maybe it was Marcus? Or maybe you were dreaming." We grabbed breakfast at a local diner, and Ryan left shortly after. I spent most of that Sunday running errands and meeting up with other friends. By the time I got home that evening, I had pretty much forgotten about the incident from the night before. I was exhausted from the long day, so I took a quick shower and got ready for bed. Instead of falling asleep immediately, I decided to watch some television to unwind. I was about halfway through a movie when I heard it again. Footsteps. They were coming from directly above my bedroom, in what I knew was my parents' room. This time, the sounds were clearer and more deliberate. These were not settling noises or my imagination. Someone was definitely walking around upstairs. My heart started beating faster as I muted the television and listened carefully. The footsteps continued for several seconds before stopping. I sat up in bed, straining to hear anything else. The house was completely silent. I tried to convince myself that it could be my parents coming home early, but I knew they were not supposed to return until Tuesday. I had spoken to my mother that afternoon, and she had mentioned they were having dinner with my aunt's family. Then, I heard my doorknob again. This time it turned more slowly and deliberately than the night before. When the door did not open, there were 3 soft knocks. My blood ran cold. I reached for my phone with shaking hands and immediately sent text messages to Marcus and Ryan. The knocking stopped, but I could not bring myself to move from my bed. I sat frozen, listening for any other sounds. Every creak of the house seemed amplified. I realized I needed to call for help. I dialed 911 and whispered as quietly as possible while still being audible. The operator asked me to describe my situation, and I explained that someone was in my house and had tried to enter my locked bedroom. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. I did not feel safe leaving my room, so I asked the operator to have the police meet me at my bedroom window. My room was at ground level, so this was possible. She relayed the message, and within 10 minutes, I heard a gentle tapping on my window. I peered through the blinds and saw a police officer with a flashlight. I opened the window and handed him my keys, pointing toward the side entrance. A few moments later, I heard the door to my apartment open, and the officer called out to let me know it was safe to come out. Two officers were in my living room when I emerged from my bedroom. We turned on all the lights and began searching the basement level first. There were not many places to hide down there, so it did not take long to clear the area. Next, we went upstairs to search the main floor. The officers moved methodically through each room while I stayed behind them in the hallway. The kitchen was empty. The living room was clear. The guest bathroom showed no signs of disturbance. When we reached my parents' bedroom, one of the officers motioned for me to wait in the hallway while they conducted their search. I could hear them moving around, checking the closet and looking behind furniture. Suddenly, there was a commotion from inside the room. I heard one of the officers shout, "Do not move! Let me see your hands!" My stomach dropped as I realized they had found someone. Through the open doorway, I could see both officers focused on the area near my parents' bed. One was on his radio calling for backup, while the other was giving commands to someone I could not see. "Step back downstairs, please," one of the officers called to me. I did not argue. A few minutes later, I watched from the bottom of the stairs as the officers escorted a man down from the bedroom. He was tall and thin, wearing dirty clothes and looking like he had not showered in weeks. His hair was matted, and his eyes had a wild look that made me feel sick to my stomach. "Do you know this man?" one of the officers asked me. I shook my head vigorously. I have never seen him before in my life. The man stared at me with an expression that was both angry and disturbing. He did not say a word as they led him out of the house, but his eyes never left mine until he was out the door. After they had removed the intruder, the officers explained that they had found him hiding under my parents' bed. He had apparently been there for an unknown amount of time. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and I told them absolutely. The police took my statement and gave me a case number. They advised me to have the locks changed and to consider installing a security system. They also suggested that I should not stay alone in the house until my parents returned. I called my parents as soon as the officers left, even though it was late. My mother answered on the third ring, sounding groggy but concerned when she heard my voice. I explained everything that had happened, and they immediately said they would drive home first thing in the morning. I did not sleep at all that night. Instead, I sat in my living room with all the lights on, checking and rechecking that all the doors and windows were locked. Every small sound made me jump. The next morning, my parents arrived home earlier than expected. My father immediately went upstairs to examine their bedroom, while my mother sat with me in the kitchen, making coffee with shaking hands. Later that day, we learned from the police that the man was homeless and had a history of breaking into homes. He apparently had been living in our house for at least 3 days, possibly longer. The thought that he had been there while I was sleeping, while my friends were over, while I was going about my normal routine, made me feel physically ill. We changed all the locks that same day and installed a security system within the week. I continued living in the basement apartment, but I never again left the connecting door unlocked when my parents were away. The experience changed how safe I felt in what I had always considered my sanctuary. Even now, months later, I still check under beds and in closets before going to sleep. Some fears, once learned, are difficult to unlearn. I always thought the old farmhouse was perfect. 3 years ago, I bought this place in rural Montana, far from the noise and stress of city life. The house sits on 40 acres of open land, with wheat fields stretching to the horizon in every direction. My closest neighbor lives 8 miles down the dirt road, and some days, I don't see another soul. That's exactly what I wanted. The silence out here is complete. No traffic, no sirens, just the wind moving through the grain and the occasional call of a hawk overhead. I work from home as a freelance graphic designer, so the isolation suits me perfectly. The front porch wraps around the entire house, giving me a clear view of the fields and the long gravel driveway that leads to the main road. In the evenings, I sit out there with my coffee, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. It has always been perfectly peaceful, until 3 weeks ago. I was working late one night when I heard something outside. A soft thud, like someone had dropped something heavy on the porch. I looked up from my computer and listened, but everything was quiet again. I figured it was probably just a branch falling from the old oak tree that hangs over the roof. The wind had been strong that day. I went back to work and didn't think about it again. But the next night I heard it again. The same dull thud, this time followed by what sounded like footsteps across the wooden porch boards. Slow, deliberate steps that moved from one end of the porch to the other. I stood up and walked to the front window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to look out. The porch light was on, casting a yellow glow across the boards, but I didn't see anything. No person, no animal, just empty space. I told myself it was probably a deer. They come right up to the house sometimes, looking for the vegetables I grow in the garden out back. But something about those footsteps didn't feel right. They were too measured, too purposeful. The following evening, I decided to stay alert. I turned off all the lights in the house and sat by the living room window, watching the porch. For hours, nothing happened. I was starting to feel foolish when I heard it again. This time, it wasn't just footsteps. It was a dragging sound, like someone was pulling something heavy across the porch. The sound moved slowly from the front door toward the side of the house, where my bedroom window faced out. My heart started beating faster. I crept to the bedroom and peered out through the blinds. The moon was bright enough to see clearly, but the porch was empty. Whatever had been there was gone. I barely slept that night. Every small sound made me jump. The house settling, the wind rattling a loose shutter, even the hum of the refrigerator seemed threatening. The next day, I walked around the entire porch, looking for any sign of what might have been there. I found deep scratches in the wooden boards near the front door, like someone had been dragging something with metal edges. The scratches were fresh, cutting through the old paint down to the bare wood. That night, I heard a new sound, a soft tapping on my bedroom window, almost like someone was gently knocking with their fingernails. Tap, tap, tap. Then, silence. Then again, tap, tap, tap. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep beside my bed and slowly approached the window. My hands were shaking as I pulled the blinds apart. There was nothing outside except the empty field, but the tapping continued. I realized it was coming from a different window, the one in the kitchen. I moved through the dark house, following the sound as it seemed to move from window to window. Kitchen, then living room, then back to the bedroom. Like someone was walking around the house, tapping on each window as they passed. I called out, my voice louder than I intended. "I know you're out there. I'm calling the police." The tapping stopped immediately. The silence that followed was worse than the sound had been. I didn't call the police that night. I convinced myself that I didn't have enough evidence. What would I tell them? That someone was tapping on my windows? They would think I was losing my mind. But I couldn't ignore what happened next. 2 nights later, I woke up to find my front door standing wide open. I always lock it before bed, and I distinctly remembered checking it that night. The door was open, and the screen door was hanging by one hinge, as if someone had forced their way out. Or in. I searched the entire house with the baseball bat in my hands, checking every room, every closet, under every bed. Nothing was missing, nothing was disturbed, but I found muddy footprints on the kitchen floor. Boot prints, much larger than my feet, tracking from the front door to the back door and then back again. Someone had been inside my house while I was sleeping. I drove to town the next morning and bought security cameras and motion lights. I spent the day installing them around the property, focusing on the porch and the areas around the windows. If someone was watching me, I was going to catch them. That night, I sat at my computer with the camera feeds open on my screen. I could see every angle of the house, every approach across the fields. For hours, nothing moved except the grain swaying in the breeze. Then, at 2 a.m, the motion light on the north side of the house flicked on. I switched to that camera and saw a figure standing at the edge of the lights range. It was a person, definitely a person, but they were too far away to make out any details. They stood there for several minutes, perfectly still, facing the house. Then, they stepped back into the darkness and disappeared. I downloaded the footage and watched it over and over, but the person was just a dark silhouette. I couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, tall or short, young or old. But they knew exactly where the camera was, and they had stayed just far enough away to avoid being clearly seen. The next night, they came closer. The motion light triggered, and this time, I could see that it was a man. wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He stood in my driveway staring directly at the house for nearly 10 minutes before walking away. I called the sheriff's office and filed a report. I showed them the footage, and they promised to increase patrols in the area. The deputy who took my statement was professional but seemed skeptical. He suggested that it might be someone who was lost, or maybe a homeless person looking for shelter. But I knew better. This person wasn't lost. They were watching me, studying me, learning my routines. The cameras caught him 3 more times over the next week. Each night, he came a little closer to the house. By the 6th night, he was standing on my porch, looking directly into the camera. The image was clear enough that I could see he was smiling. I printed out the clearest photo and drove to the sheriff's office, but the deputy I spoke with said there wasn't much they could do. The man wasn't technically trespassing unless he tried to enter the house, and he hadn't made any threats. They would keep the photo on file and continue the extra patrols. That night, I packed a bag and drove to a motel in town. I couldn't stay in the house anymore, knowing that he was out there, watching, waiting for something. From the motel, I called my brother in Denver and told him everything. He listened without interruption, then said what I already knew. I needed to get out of there. He offered to let me stay with him until I could figure out what to do next. I went back to the house the following morning to collect more of my things. The front door was unlocked again, even though I was certain I had locked it when I left. Inside, I found a note on my kitchen table written in block letters on a piece of notebook paper. "You can't hide from me." I didn't pack anything else. I just turned around and left. I called the sheriff from the road and told them about the note, but I didn't wait for them to arrive. I drove straight to Denver without looking back. That was 2 months ago. The sheriff's office called me a few weeks later to say they had searched the property and found no sign of the intruder. They suggested I install a security system and consider hiring a caretaker if I plan to return. But I'm not going back. I've put the house up for sale and I'm looking for a place in the city, somewhere with neighbors and streetlights and people around all the time. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about him. I wonder if he's still out there, watching the empty house, waiting for me to come home. The realtor says she's had trouble showing the property to potential buyers. She can't explain why, but people seem uncomfortable there. I know why. He's still there, still watching, still waiting, and he always will be. This happened during my junior year of high school, sometime in early March of 2019. My parents had driven to the city for my mom's work conference and would not be back until Sunday evening. That left me home alone with our golden retriever, Max, for the entire weekend. Saturday night around 10:30, I was sprawled on the couch playing video games online with my headset on. Max was sleeping on his bed near the fireplace, occasionally twitching his legs as he chased something in his dreams. I was in the middle of an intense match when Max suddenly jerked awake and started growling low in his throat. He was staring directly at the sliding glass door that led to our back deck. I paused my game and pulled off my headset to listen. At first, I heard nothing except the usual sounds of wind through the trees behind our house. Max continued to growl, his ears pinned back and his body tense. I figured maybe a raccoon was rummaging through our trash cans again. I walked over to the sliding door and flicked on the back porch light. The deck appeared empty, but Max was now on his feet, pacing back and forth in front of the door. His growling had turned into quiet whimpers of anxiety. I returned to my game, but I could not concentrate. Every few minutes, Max would start up again, alternating between the back door and the front windows. Each time I checked, I saw nothing unusual outside. Around 11:15, I heard what sounded like footsteps on our front porch. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped right in front of our door. Max immediately began barking ferociously, something he rarely did unless strangers approached the house. I crept to the front window and carefully moved the curtain aside. Our porch light was motion activated, but it had not turned on. The street lamp provided just enough light for me to see that our driveway was empty except for my car. The footsteps started again, this time moving around the side of the house toward our kitchen window. My stomach dropped. Max was following the sound from inside, running from window to window, his barks becoming more urgent. I grabbed my phone and considered calling my parents, but I worried I might be overreacting. Maybe it was just a neighbor looking for their lost cat or something innocent like that. The sounds stopped completely for about 10 minutes. Max settled down but remained alert, his ears constantly moving, as he listened for any new disturbances. I tried to convince myself that whoever it was had left. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of our back gate creaking open. To reach that gate, someone would have to walk all the way around our house and through a narrow path between our fence and the neighbor's shed. There was no reason for anyone to be back there unless they were specifically trying to access our backyard. Max went completely silent, which scared me more than his barking had. He stood frozen by the back door, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring ready to attack. I heard soft scraping sounds coming from the area near our basement window. Someone was definitely trying to find a way inside. My hands were shaking as I finally decided to call my parents. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail. Mom always turned her phone off during conference dinners. I tried Dad's number with the same result. The scraping sounds grew louder, and I could hear what sounded like someone testing the basement window frame. Max suddenly erupted into the most aggressive barking I'd ever heard from him. He was scratching at the back door, desperate to get outside and confront whatever was out there. I ran upstairs to my parents' bedroom and locked the door behind me. From their window, I had a better view of the backyard. I carefully peered through the blinds and saw a dark figure crouched near our basement window well. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. I called 911 and whispered our address to the dispatcher, explaining that someone was trying to break into our house. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way. The sounds from outside suddenly stopped. Max's barking faded to anxious whining as he continued to patrol the downstairs. I stayed hidden in my parents' room, clutching the phone and listening for sirens. About 15 minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights reflecting off the walls. 2 police officers arrived and spent nearly an hour searching our property with flashlights. They found footprints in the soft soil around our basement window and evidence that someone had been tampering with the window frame, but whoever it was had vanished. The officers stayed until my parents arrived home around midnight. Mom was frantic with worry, and Dad spent the rest of the night checking and double-checking every lock in the house. Sunday morning, we were all exhausted and on edge. Dad was installing additional security lights when we heard a car pull into our driveway. Through the front window, I watched my Uncle Gary get out of his truck and walk toward our door. Uncle Gary was Dad's younger brother, and there had always been something off about him. He had never married and seemed to have trouble maintaining friendships or steady employment. At family gatherings, he would make inappropriate comments and had this habit of standing too close to people when he talked. Last summer, my cousin Emma had mentioned that Uncle Gary had been driving by her house at odd hours, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. Her parents had asked him to stop, but Emma said she still sometimes saw his truck parked down the street. Dad opened the door before Uncle Gary could knock. I listened from the kitchen as Uncle Gary stammered through some explanation about being in our neighborhood the night before and seeing our lights on. He said he had wanted to drop off a birthday card for me, since my birthday was coming up in a few weeks. He claimed he had tried knocking on the front door, but got no answer, so he decided to check if we might be in the backyard. Dad's voice was getting louder and angrier as Uncle Gary continued his explanation. I heard him say something about how Uncle Gary had no business walking around our property in the dark, and that he could have gotten himself shot. Uncle Gary handed over a birthday card with $20 inside and a note thanking me for helping him move furniture from his old apartment last month. Dad practically slammed the door in his face. Later that afternoon, Dad called Uncle Gary's landlord and discovered that Uncle Gary had been evicted from his apartment 2 weeks earlier. He had been staying in his truck and using the gym downtown to shower. We never found out if Uncle Gary had actually been trying to break in or if he was just looking for a place to sleep for the night. Dad reported the incident to the police anyway, and we made it clear that Uncle Gary was not welcome at our house anymore. Even now, years later, I still get anxious when I'm home alone at night. Max passed away during my sophomore year of college, and I miss having his protective presence. The whole experience taught me to trust my instincts and not dismiss strange sounds or feelings. I still wonder what Uncle Gary's real intentions were that night. Was he genuinely just trying to deliver a birthday card, or was there something more sinister behind his actions? The fact that he had been living in his truck makes me think he might have been desperate enough to try breaking in for shelter. But the way he had moved around our house so methodically, testing different entry points, felt calculated and deliberate. And the timing of his visit, when he knew my parents would be out of town, still bothers me. I suppose I will never know the complete truth about what happened that night. What I do know is that I am grateful for Max's protective instincts and that my parents took the situation seriously. It could have ended very differently if Uncle Gary had actually managed to get inside.